So much of what we do here, what goes on here at Congregation Beth Sholom, is Jewish ritual that is designed to lift up our weary hands, to do it together and in prayer. And we hope that you'll be able to feel that as much as possible with the packages and the videos that we are providing for you. Now, if you go to synagogue at all, Professor Kelman writes, you go to hear the Kol Nidre, because this is the one moment during the Jewish year where synagogues rise to meet the expectations. Now, in conversations we've been having this past week, there were some of you who agreed, and you said that you come here to hear the melody of the Kol Nidre every year. But there are also some of you who said that you come for other reasons, like the feeling you get when everybody is tightly packed in, that sense of togetherness or closeness, coming together for a purpose. You come to see family and friends and people who matter most, maybe old friends and acquaintances you haven't seen for a while. Some of you come to remember parents and to be reminded about the community that you are a part of, the community that cares for you. And as I sat and listened to all of these, I realized the full extent to which there's only so much that we are capable of providing you during this pandemic. And I'm sorry to say that we will not meet all of your expectations. Now, some have told me that they found it helpful to watch these services with their eyes closed because they're sick of staring at screens all day long. Or perhaps some of you are also going out to a nice spot outside and just listen, either with or without a prayer book. But try, if possible, to get over your expectations about what you're supposed to feel, what this day is supposed to mean, how you're supposed to pray. You really have to let that go. Kol Nidre, all of those vows and promises that you've made to yourself about how things were going to be. A neder is a vow that you make between yourself and God. Or another way to think about it is a vow that you make with yourself and that higher sense of self and purpose that you still hold out for yourself. I remember my mother telling me about a vow that she made when she was 14 years old. I promised myself, she told me, that my children would never be latchkey kids, she said, that there would always be someone at home for them. Now, while she was at home, she was writing for Jewish magazines and newspapers, and for a while, she had a weekly column as the kosher kitchen in the Long Island Jewish World. And she even did a Passover cooking demo on Regis, his television show. Although Reg famously gagged on my mother's matzah brie. He went for a cheap joke. And in truth, it wasn't until he passed away this past July that she fully forgave him. Now, soon after this incident, she found that she had a different calling, and she went back to school to get her doctorate in education, ultimately becoming the assistant superintendent of the local Long Island school district. But I clearly remember her sitting me down when I was 14 and telling me about her vow and the guilt that she was feeling, and asking me for my permission to allow her to go back to school. I said no. All of these bonds, devotions, promises, oaths that we have vowed and sworn, devoted ourselves from this day of atonement to the next day of atonement, we repent us of them. A neder is a vow, a natar, close in linkage to the word neder. A natar is a leap. We make a leap. We leap from the present moment where we're at into some moment in the future. We create an expectation of how things are supposed to go down. Where will we be in 5 years? What's the home that we would like to own? The partner who we would like to be with? The weight we would like to lose? We all have these expectations. How's that working out in 2020? Kol Nidre. All of these times we have leaped in our mind to some point in the future, all of the times in which we have not been present, all of those times in which we're annoyed and frustrated that things did not turn out the way that they were supposed to. Now, the liturgy, interestingly here, focuses on the vows that you will make from this Yom Kippur until next year, next Yom Kippur. In essence, it'll absolve you from all of those promises that you're going to make with yourself about how 5781 is going to go down. Because if we've learned anything from 5780, it's that we have no idea. We're simply blessed to be here. Cameras and all. Now, the last time I spoke with my friend Fred was this past January. And I was walking down Clement Street from CBS towards Rabbi Russell's home for our new member dinner. Now, my friend Fred and I, we met as randomly assigned freshman roommates at Brandeis University. First, we became close friends, and then we both became rabbis. He later told me that when he first arrived on campus and saw me in the meet book that they give out to students, I think it was called something else at Harvard, he said he thought I could help him meet girls. He would be disappointed. But even before I moved out west, we had grown apart. He was always carrying 4 jobs in 3 communities, and New Jersey and Brooklyn can actually seem quite far away. But every once in a while, he would call me to report some bad news about a recent diagnosis he got. It would get worse, and then it would get better. He liked to say that he had 9 lives, but his body, his nefesh, wasn't always his best ally. But his will kept it going far past anybody's expectations. Now, Fred worked his way through school. He took a job leading Shabbat for kids at a nearby synagogue near Brandeis. I think pretty much the first weekend we arrived on campus. And that's where he would be for every Shabbat, for all 4 years of school, and after that in shul and in camp and in community, pretty much for every subsequent Shabbat after that. Right up until the turn of 2020 when I got a call from his wife and I bought an airplane ticket. Talking to him on my phone on the doorstep out front of Amanda's house, Fred complained to me about his job. This was something that he had never done in 26 years of our relationship. Not once did he ever complain to me about work. He was a school rabbi now, and he said he couldn't stand the meetings and the conversations any longer. He knew that they were including him in the strategic development, but even though they thought to include him out of respect, he said to me, I just want to be in the classroom with the children. He even told me about the conversation he had with the rabbi about planning for his son's bar mitzvah. I looked into Rabbi Russell's house, and I could see that everyone was taking off their coats. They were settling down with a drink. And I told him that I would be there in 2 weeks, and we would spend Shabbat together. Fred died the following week. Now, perhaps one of the strangest things about this year has been trying to figure out how we are going to do life cycle events. This is never more challenging or sensitive than around the issues of death and dying. Negotiating how we are going to do burials required a little bit of mediation during these past 6 months. The first of which were the expectations of the families. And I know for some of you who are joining us tonight, this concerns your loved ones. Many of us, I know, plan for how we're going to cope when a parent or a loved one will pass away. Expectations are set. I remember my grandmother of blessed memory. She sat me down and she showed me on one of my visits to Boca all of the arrangements, rather proudly, all the arrangements that she had made for her own funeral. She had picked out the plot, the casket, the car, and I remember she even showed me the receipt for the gratuity that she had already covered for the driver. Now, there were also those of you who found yourself unable to visit your mother or your father because of the COVID restrictions, because of your concerns for making matters worse, or because you live too far away. We all plan to say goodbye, but for some of us, that was taken away. I actually found myself negotiating between a funeral home, a cemetery, and I'm sorry to say, with the mourner himself. You know, the beautiful part about Jewish rituals and death and dying are that the rabbi calls up a mourner and we tell them exactly what to do, where to be, how to dress, and we try our best not to put any decisions upon them. But this year we had to break every expectation. And we talked about whether or not we were prepared to jump a fence, whether or not we were okay taking possession of the body, and whether or not we were going to call upon other congregants so that we could have a minyan so the mourner could recite the mourner's Kaddish at the graveside. Thankfully, no law-breaking or extreme measures ended up being necessary, but there was one thing that we learned early on. It was that shovels were going to be a problem. So at first, we had to do all of the burials with our bare hands. And I remember there was a woman who was in her 90s reaching down to pick up some dirt to toss into the grave of her sister. In any other situation, I would have certainly gone over to help her out. I would have picked up a shovel and shoveled it for her or with her. But here I wasn't allowed to get close. So I watched as she leaned over near the edge of the grave and she picked up one large rock. And like Juan Marichal in anger, she chucked it straight down into the casket 6 feet below. And you could hear the crack of the casket below as she cried out, 6 years younger than me. 6 years younger than me. Now, in my effort to do some cheshbon and nefesh work over this past few weeks, I went back and read through all of the notes from our Fridays at 4 program. This was a good way to see how we were communicating to you during the early days of the pandemic, what I was saying in terms of how we were holding it all together. You might recall that Fridays at 4 program, the quickly thrown together, technologically challenging Friday program that Alana and I led live from our living room during the first few weeks and months of the pandemic. We never intended it to go on for as many Fridays as it did, but reading back through those notes and thinking about the kindness and the realness of my wife, the heart that she brought into our home, and my desire to share that with all of you as much as we could. We will never forget those first Fridays. And I know those of you who are working on behind the scenes to make it happen, you certainly won't forget. And I want to say to all of you, I'm sorry. It was hard back then. It was all very new. I made a vow to myself, to God, during the high holidays and the weeks following 9/11 that I would never again be stuck in my house, in my room, during a community tragedy. And the irony, because God is nothing if not ironic, is that here I was all those years later during a worldwide cataclysm. I'm the rabbi and I'm stuck inside. And I have to say I didn't handle everything great. People wanted answers I didn't have. People's expectations for their simchas and for their shul weren't met. And there were times in which my frustrations with my inability to communicate, sometimes communication is really just two people sitting in a room together, breathing, sharing air. I want to apologize to all of you who I may have alienated in my worst moments. Perhaps previously we were able to keep a stronger lid on what happens in our homes and what happens befar hesia, out in the public. But currently we don't have any public space. There's no commons in our world anymore. It all takes place in our homes. And now you've seen a bit more of it. And I'm sorry to say, a little bit more of me than maybe I wish you had. I'm sorry if you got to see a harshness in me. And I'm sorry for not returning your emails. I hope you can forgive me for my less than flattering moments and see me for just being the same kid from Long Island who was afraid to get off of his couch that September 11th, but who was still trying his best. Now, the Torah says that when Moses' hands grew heavy, they took a stone and they put it under him and he sat down on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands, so his hands remained steady until the sun set. Now, the sun is about to set here, and soon we're going to have to let you go. And for the first time in 100 years, Congregation Beth Sholom will not physically be there for you to help hold your hands up during this Day of Atonement. We won't be there to give you permission to sit down during Ne'ilah because it looks like you're fading. We won't be there to insist that you absolutely have to take a drink of water. I won't be over there to walk over to you and put my arms and my talit around you as you say a silent prayer. I won't be around to schmooze when you run out of the service just because you have to go at just that time. Or see you in the back row and just nod. But no matter how different this looks or feels for us this year, the psalm remains the same. And Kol Nidre can still remind us that all of those expectations, those ideas that we have about the way things should be or must be, let's not get so far ahead of ourselves this upcoming year. Let us, God willing, remember that yes, there are two paths that you can go by. But in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. And let us say, Amen.